This is my Porsche 911 996. So in this video I'm going to explain why I bought that model, what to look out for when you're buying one of these cars, the differences between the different versions of the 996, some problems that I've had with this car, including vandalism, what's gone wrong with it and broken, and the upgrades I've had done to it to make it better to drive. And of course I'll take it for a drive and explain to you how those changes have actually played out. There's been a few problems with the interior of this car, nothing major, but what you'd expect really for a car that's 20 years old. So the LCD display for the air conditioning system, part of it just kind of like blanked away, and it happened about 6 months ago. It hasn't got any worse, hopefully it won't. I actually replaced the old stereo, which worked fine, but the sound wasn't particularly good. Also, this one's got USB input and I can connect it via Bluetooth, and the sound is superior. When I first switched it over, I didn't realise you had to actually remove a fuse, which is part of the car's security system, which is looking for the original stereo. So it knows if someone's stolen it, and then it sets the alarm off, and so the alarm kept on going off. Looked it up online, found out about this fuse, whipped this back out again, which is quite easy to do, and remove the fuse, and all is now good. Another thing that's happened is that I opened the vanity mirror here a little bit too enthusiastically, and it snapped the cover, so it's just held on by a bit of elephant tape, and that does mean that the light doesn't activate properly, although it does if you press down on it. A few bits and bobs here, so a little crack in there, these are a bit loose, nothing too major. I did have a problem with the seat. So the driver's seat, it's on a gas strut for raising it up. One day I came to the car and it was like this, and it wouldn't go down, so I had to have a new one fitted. Another problem is the material that this centre console is made out of. It's got like a coating on it, and in parts it's just rubbed off from where someone's hand's been touching it. There's a few scratches here on the door handle from whoever owned it before, obviously with their ring scratching away at it. And that is pretty much it here on the inside. It's not too bad at all. The seats, they're still fine, they're not worn through. The pedal rubbers, they're okay as well. Back seats, nothing wrong with them at all. That's it. That's all I have to complain about on the inside. Oh, apart from this, a few air bubbles have appeared on the face of the dials. They don't seem to be multiplying, but sometimes they go up and down depending on the temperature. Obviously the air heating up in them. But really, that is it. Everything else here on the inside, absolutely hunky-dory. As standard, this car's exhaust is just too quiet. Now, you can enhance the sound by fitting an aftermarket exhaust, but to save money, you can do something else, something called a Gundo hack. Basically, that is fitting a little bypass pipe, so some of the gases go round the muffler, and the tone you get from that change will vary depending on the diameter of that bypass pipe you fit. So I had it done by a guy called PCW Welding, that's his business name, links below, about 250 quid, and it transformed the sound of this car, and now I love it and go hunting for tunnels and walls so I can get the sound reverberating off those. Anyway, have a listen to this. I'm going to start it up. If you ask me, that sounds pretty awesome. It's even better when you're driving. There's a couple of things you need to know if you're buying a Porsche 911 996. There's three major problems. So, the first is something called the intermediate shaft bearing. So it's a sealed bearing that's inside the engine, and it drives the chain that drives the camshafts. And what can happen is that it can just disintegrate, and then your engine explodes. And you're going to have to pay for a new engine or about an £8 rebuild. There's lots of talk about this problem over the internet, and you would think that every car was going to explode. However, in America there was a class action lawsuit against Porsche, and they found out that of cars with the dual row bearing, which means it has two rows of ball bearings, less than 1% failed. Those with the small single row bearing, less than 10% failed. And of those with the larger single row bearing, very few failed. So you're at risk if you've got the small single row bearing. Now, how do you know which bearing you've got? Well, you can go online to find out because it's all down to engine number, The earlier your car is, the more likely it is that it has a dual row bearing. Anything after 2000 is probably going to have the smaller single row, so most at risk. Then later cars around 2003 have the larger bearing. Now, a lot of people retrofit aftermarket bearings to prevent the risk of the original bearing exploding. Now, I haven't had this done, and I haven't had it done because I've spoken to various engine experts who say you probably shouldn't. My car is the early car, so it has the dual row bearing, which is stronger. Also, the cost of having it done is £2,000, so you've got to really think about the odds of it happening compared to the cost. Also, a lot of people who've had the bearing removed and aftermarket ones put in have then looked at their old bearing and it's absolutely fine. So I think it's overhyped to make a load of aftermarket suppliers wealthy. But the main reason I haven't had it done is because yanking a bearing out of an engine can put strain on the engine and you can actually do more harm than good. And the fact of the matter is there's loads of other things that can go wrong with an old car like this, that you could spend that money, have that done, and then one of the crankshaft bearings go, or a little end bearing goes, or anything really. What I've been doing though is having my engine oil analysed. I had it done recently and there is no sign of any metal in the engine oil at all. So I think my bearing's probably fine, and so is the rest of the engine. It's really good to get that oil analysis done. It's only 30 quid, peace of mind, well worth it. The next problem that can happen with these cars is something called de-chunking. Because of the way the engine is designed with cylinder walls which can actually flex, they can snap off parts of the cylinder wall, which ruins your engine. This happened on early cars, but usually it happened quite soon on, so within 20,000-30,000 miles. My car's done 65,000 miles, so it should be all right. The final thing that can happen is something called bore scoring. So the way the engine is designed and how Porsche kept on boring it out from the original block, which was used in the box of the 2.5, meant that it got inadequate cooling and the walls were quite thin. And the bigger the engine got, the more torque it got, and as a result, when they're hot, the ear wall can get a bit too thin, then you end up getting the piston actually rubbing against the cylinder lining and it scratches it, scores the bores. Now you notice that that's happening because you'll start to get a bit of increased oil consumption and maybe a sooty exhaust pipe, usually on the left side, because the right hand side is worse due to the way that the coolant goes around the engine. The clear sign that you got it though is when your car just goes as a piston knocks against the cylinder lining. Yeah, that's a horrible sound and it's expensive. You're looking at about £4,000 to £8,000 rebuild, depending on how many cylinders you need doing. So check that out if you buy one of these cars. One of the ways you can tell that a 996 isn't suffering from bore scoring is to have it bore scoped. What they do is remove the spark plug, put a little camera down and have a look at the cylinder lining. So I had mine done and all 6 cylinders were fine, so phew. Now, due to all these problems, was one of the reasons why I went for this car. The very early 996s aren't so at risk of bore scoring, and part of the reason for that is that they actually have slightly more expensive pistons, which Porsche stopped using after the first 2 years of building the cars. Also, bore scoring is worse on the later cars, so the 3.6 engine is more likely to suffer from it. But another reason why I wanted one of these early cars is because the engine has a cable throttle. So when they introduced Porsche Stability Management, they introduced something called e-gas, which is basically drive-by-wire. So the accelerator pedal isn't actually connected to the throttle body, it's done with electronics. As a result, you don't have quite such a sharp throttle response, and that's one thing about this car. The throttle response is amazing. You just flex your right foot and instant response. There's nothing like it that you'll drive today that has that instant pickup. It's so lovely, and that's one of the things that gives you a thrill about driving, the fact that every action you take has a reaction in the car and you feel that reaction back. It's so nice. So that's a reason why I wanted an earlier car. They've proved to be less likely to go wrong. They're also purer. So the only driving aids this has is ABS, and as a result you just feel more. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a car that was different than all the modern supercars and sports cars I drive today for my job. Another thing is I just prefer the 3.4 engine, the way it revs. It's just a little bit more revvy. The 3.6 pulls harder from lower down, but this, once you're above 3, it's got plenty of torque, and then it just sings all the way up to the 7,000 RPM red line. The 3.4, the early one, is also lighter as well. That's the reason I went with the early 3.4. So a 98 or a 99 is a good choice. Now, I have had a couple of problems with this car. So the first thing was when someone sat on the roof and dented it all in. Thought I was going to need a new roof on it, but I took it to a place called the Dent Network in Peterborough and they managed to knock it out. Absolutely brilliant work. The link for them is in the description below as well. Another thing that happened to my car was within about 6 months. the gearbox was kind of hard to get into second. I mean, it can be anyway when the car's warming up, so if it's cold, it's a bit clunky, but this was unusually so. Anyway, the dealer investigated it and found out that the synchro mesh on second was gone, so it needed a rebuild. Now this would have come to about £4,000. Fortunately, the car was still under warranty, so they rebuilt the gearbox, put a whole new second gear in, new synchros on first, second, third and fourth. Now one of the reasons my car's gearbox went is because it was a London car, driven around town, constantly changing gear. In fact, when I had the ECU checked, when I was buying it, the average speed of the car over its life was 17 miles an hour. Now it's worth getting the engine checked like that because you can see if there's been any over revs. So this car had not been over revved at all, and there's two types of over revs. One is when you hit the limiter and it just cuts the ignition spark. It's not a problem really, it just shows that the car's been driven hard. The other one is a mechanical. When you do it changing down a gear, you basically force the engine to actually go faster than it wants to, and that can stretch your chains, it can cause your pistons to hit your valves, and it's an absolute nightmare. So do not buy a car that's had a mechanical over rev at any point. Another thing that I was looking for when I was buying a 996 was I wanted it basic, not too many options. Things like the Bose sound system add weight, I want to keep it nice and light. Also, I didn't want the sunroof because that does affect the structural integrity ever so slightly. Another thing that I wanted and was a must, rear wheel drive and a manual. The Tiptronic of these is awful. They don't feel quick at all. They're just for cruising around. Now you can actually get a 996 from about 10 grand, but avoid those. They will not be well looked after. Do not scrimp on buying one because you're only going to pay way more later in repairs. So this one was 16 grand. It had done 55,000 miles. I've now done 65,000. Now I have had quite a few things done to this car in addition to the exhaust. So when the gearbox was out, I decided to just have the clutch and flywheel replaced, just as a matter of course, because the dealer said all I had to do was pay for parts and they'd do the labour on it because they had the car apart anyway. I also had a limited slip differential fitted to it. In real tight corners, you do notice the locking effect, giving you a bit more traction. I was going to go with a Quaife, which is a torque sensing diff, but I went with something called a Wave Track, which is also a torque sensing diff. But the problem with torque sensing diffs is that if you're decelerating, they don't actually work. However, the Wave Track actually has some little clutches in it, and it does work when you're decelerating, so you get that stabilising effect like a normal clutch pack diff. Another thing I've done to the car is fit semi-solid engine mounts. So the normal engine mounts allow the engine to move around, whereas these keep it pretty firm, and that just makes the whole back end of the car feel more precise. The trade-off is though is that it thumps over bumps because there's no give in the engine, there's no damping effect. Speaking of no damping effect, I've had the car fitted with Öhlins Road and Track coilovers and fully polybush with Powerflex bushings. The result is that the ride is quite firm, so the springs are about twice as firm as the normal springs, and the dampers are firmer as well, then you can adjust them. The trade-off though is that it sends more vibrations into the car, and so it causes an old car like this to just rattle a bit more. When I bought the car, it's on Pirelli P0s and they're not great. So I swapped them onto Yokohama AD08Rs and they are brilliant. They've got a really stiff sidewall, so there's loads of feel through the steering, and the amount of grip you get is incredible. I've also had some rated anti-roll bars fitted to the car as well with new drop links. They're from a company called Tarrant in the States, and they're hollow anti-roll bars, so they're lighter. Also they're adjustable, so you can alter the amount of grip you get at the front end and the back end. So if you soften at the front end and get more grip and tighten at the back end for slightly less grip, you can cause the car to have more oversteer than understeer. And I've got it sort of set up that way because as standard, it's quite understeery. So now it just feels more pointy, and it's more adjustable on the throttle as well. You can feel it moving and responding to your inputs. All that suspension stuff doesn't come cheap though. To have it all done and fitted, you're looking at 6 grand. The Wave Track diff as well, I think that was 1,500 quid. Like I said, didn't have to pay for labour. The clutch and flywheel came to about 600 quid. The new engine mounts, they're about 500 quid fitted. I did have a BMC air filter fitted to it, a panel filter, but I didn't like the sound of it inside the car. It was a bit too drony, so I just removed it. And actually, I found out by removing it and putting the old normal filter back in, I had a bit more power from the engine. So ironically, the high performance air filter reduced the performance. Now I've had this car on the dyno and it's doing 285 horsepower. It came out of the factory apparently with 295. So it's lost about 10 horsepower, which isn't too bad for an old gun. You're not really going to notice that at all. The graph of the dyno chart is quite funny because at the top it's kind of wavy and you feel that when you're driving it. I'm not sure if that's to do with the mass airflow meter, which measures the amount of oxygen going into the engine and alters the fueling, but I just think that's the way they are. Following the upgrades on my car, it has become a little bit more of a chore to drive every day in town. Doesn't matter, because I don't drive it as an everyday driver, do I? I only have it for fun. But you do feel every single bump. You go through a pothole, bang, you feel it through the car. Also, the gear changes, because I've no longer got the rubber bushing attached to the gearbox. It's a polyurethane one. It just transmits every change that you make. Another thing is the semi-solid engine mounts. So they cause the car to bang at the back when you go over a bump. Then there's a stiffer suspension. So you do feel that when you hit a bump. It's just all a bit more tiring to just drive around. And then when you're chugging along in traffic, you can feel the engine just like vibrating as everything is just transmitted into the cabin. There's more noise as well. You can hear everything. You can hear the road surface more. If you were driving it every day, you would not have the mods done. There's just no way you'd want to. Oh, I mean, this over the speed humps, everything you just feel. One thing I haven't done to this car is anything really to the engine. No supercharging, no messing around with it at all. I just want to leave it standard. It's one of the reasons I didn't fit a lightweight flywheel, because the normal flywheel isn't called dual mass, so it actually dampens the effect and the vibrations of the engine, and I didn't want to risk changing something and then it caused a problem with the engine which will cost me loads to fix. Another thing I haven't chosen on this car, the wheels. So it's on the standard 17s, and everyone goes, man, you've got to upgrade to 18s that look way better. Well, yeah, that's as maybe, but I don't agree. The 17s are lighter, so you have less unsprung mass and they just handle better. Probably got a bit less grip, but you get more feel and quicker changing of direction, which is what I want. I don't think this car needs more grip, it's grippy enough. One thing I might like to change though are the brakes. The brake pads in this car just aren't up to the job. I reckon I could do better with some aftermarkets. Let me know of a brand you'd recommend, but I was probably going to go with EBC yellow stuffs because I've got them in my Mazda MX-5 and they're pretty blooming good. Other than that though, I've got this car pretty much where I want it. I think it's an absolutely brilliant machine and I highly recommend you getting one. And maybe, who knows, they could go up in value. I'm not sure about that. Too many of them have been built, but cars like this will not be built again. I enjoyed this video on my Porsche 911 996 and you found out some things to look out for if you're thinking about buying one of these things, and also what you can do to make it even better. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon to turn your notifications on so you're alerted when I make a new upload, and if you want to watch more videos, they are there. Do it. Click them. Go on. That's it.